Okay, number 6, this is Bitcoin as a record of all the transactions, or a blockchain. You can even call this a database, and I'll explain why in a minute. So we've talked about, do you remember them all? That's why I keep trying to say them. It's for a reason. Bitcoin as a currency, as a mint, as a central bank, wallet, bank account, network, and now blockchain, a record of all the transactions. Okay, so we're almost done talking about what is Bitcoin. And now we're getting to the record, the history of all the transaction, the database, the blockchain. This record of transactions, this blockchain, is really just a massive file, which some people just call a database. Now, this database, this record of all transactions, is immutable, which just means it can't be changed. And it's a record of all the successful transactions that have occurred since the beginning of Bitcoin. By making this blockchain public and available for all to see, Satoshi empowered the miners to prove for themselves and the world, for us, that there were no double spends or anything fishy going on in the network or the transaction history. This was new, this was novel, because typically this type of investigation, this investigating and screening, would have been done by a central bank like the Federal Reserve for the US dollar, or a fraud department from a bank. But Satoshi automated the entire process and took the middleman and the human factor out. So these miners who audit the network transactions, they get paid for sure. They get that mining reward and transaction bonus, if you want to call it that, if they win that puzzle. But they're computers. They're all performing the same functions. They're racing for a chance to earn that next hot off the press Bitcoin. They're not subject to the whims of a new administration. They're not, a person that can make an error as much like a human can. The rules don't change, and they're the same for all of the computers, all of the miners. Everybody agrees on the same set of rules. Now, this file contains all the blocks that contain all the transactions from every 10-minute period going back to 2009. So as of March 6th of this 2021, we're on the 673,427th block. So they call that stack a height. So you can kind of think of it as like the stack of a building, like how many floors in a building, how many stories. One of the best parts about this is that it can't be changed or tampered with. It's immutable. Now, people can they could try to mess with it and do fishy things with it, but all of the miners would know if anything actually happened. And it begs the question again, what would you actually gain from hacking or messing up Bitcoin? There isn't a known computer on Earth to do such a thing. Maybe one day, maybe if aliens show up and they give us supercomputers, or we get that far, but not now. We already talked about how big those numbers are and what are the odds of guessing one of the numbers. Remember, if you looked at all the stars in the universe or all the grains of sand on Earth, it wasn't even halfway to the point of how many numbers and possible combinations there are for one private key, for guessing that. I know it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine that you can't guess one of these numbers, because we think in terms of 1 to 10, 1 to 1,000, even 1 to 1,000,000. These numbers are so big. They're millions times, they're just massive numbers. So it's not easy to crack. And if you did, you wouldn't get anywhere. Because the blockchain is public and freely available to all, doesn't mean that there's zero privacy. And this is one of the draws of Bitcoin, and it's why they call it pseudo-anonymous, or partly anonymous and not completely anonymous. Unless you give your addresses where you send your Bitcoin back and forth to everyone to identify you, then no one theoretically would know who you are, and you would be anonymous. You could easily create a new public key with new addresses whenever you want. This is actually something Satoshi suggested doing, is creating new addresses for every transaction for security purposes, so you couldn't easily be identified. There are forensic tools in companies, and I'm sure governments, built entirely around helping security agencies and law enforcement identify and track down bad actors who use cryptocurrencies. You hear about them. And while you think that this would make cryptocurrencies the method of choice for criminals, it's not. That's still cash. Massive databases or files like this exist with information, but what makes the blockchain so unique is how transparent it is. everyone can see it. There's no secrets with it. So you can see every detail whenever you want, however going back in history that you want. Satoshi did this by de-anonymizing these wallets and making it so that they actually have a number associated that everybody can see. By doing that, he made it free and public. And you can't do that with commercial banks. Maybe if you could take your bank account to another bank, that'd be one thing, but you can't. If you go to another bank, you get a brand new account number, routing number. You could do it with your cell phone, but you can't do it with your bank account. So that was kind of short, but it was Bitcoin as a blockchain. So some people also call this a ledger, like a book, an accounting ledger, and you see the list of all the transactions. There's many terms or names for it. There's the ledger, there's the transaction history, there's the blockchain or a database, but this is where it all comes from. It's a record of all of Bitcoin, all of cryptocurrency's transactions. So we've covered now all 6 things that Bitcoin is: a currency, a mint, a central bank, a wallet/bank account, a payment network, and now a blockchain. Now, I did say that there'd only be 6 things, but I'm going to say one other thing, and that is software. So all of those 6 things all in one, if you had to kind of go back to where it all started, and I said that Bitcoin came in a box, it's just software. But this is really important too because of the type of software that Satoshi created. So number 7, without further ado, Bitcoin as software.